2026 may become the most ambitious and risky step in Samsung's history because more and more leaks, patents, and closed presentations point to one thing: the Korean technology giant is preparing to stop being just a manufacturer of smartphones and electronics and to transform into an ecosystem of the future capable of replacing the familiar world of devices. Inside Samsung, products are being developed simultaneously that do not yet officially exist but already appear in supplier documents and insider reports. Galaxy Ring 2, a smart AI ring that may replace the smartphone as the main interface between a person and the digital world. A transparent Galaxy Tab with an invisible display. A new Samsung smartphone suspiciously similar to an iPhone but built on a completely different control philosophy, as well as the most unexpected project, the Samsung Galaxy Car, which may become a direct competitor to Tesla and Chinese electric vehicles. Sources claim that Samsung no longer wants to play by others' rules and copy trends. The company is trying to create a closed ecosystem where the phone, ring, tablet, car, and artificial intelligence work as a single organism. According to rumors, Galaxy Ring 2 will receive an advanced AI module capable of projecting interfaces, making decisions for the user, and controlling all devices without a screen, turning gestures, gaze, and biometrics into the primary method of interaction. The transparent Galaxy Tab may become the first mass device where the boundary between reality and the screen completely disappears. And the new Samsung smartphone is an attempt to rethink the very idea of a phone in an era when screens are no longer mandatory. And all of this is only the tip of the iceberg, because in parallel, Samsung is investing billions in AI chips, neural interfaces, autonomous systems, and the mobility of the future. Today, we will bring together all the potential Samsung products that may be released in 2026, examine the most high-profile leaks, and ask the main question: is Samsung preparing not just for a new device launch, but for a reboot of the entire technological reality in which we live? In the technology industry, moments when the balance of power truly shifts are rare, but recent months have shown that the smartphone market is once again entering a phase of intense confrontation comparable to the early 2000s, when Apple and Samsung first collided head-on for global leadership. This year, Apple managed to regain its dominant position after several years of unstable sales by releasing the iPhone 17 Pro Max, a device that analysts are already calling the most successful iPhone since the iPhone X. According to Counterpoint Research and IDC, the launch was record-breaking. Demand exceeded expectations, especially in the US, Europe, and key Asian markets. And the model itself became a symbol that Apple is once again setting trends rather than chasing competitors. In Cupertino, this success is seen as a strategic comeback. After criticism for a lack of innovation and a prolonged design stagnation, the company found itself back at the center of attention, and the market responded with money. But it is precisely this success, according to industry sources, that became the trigger for an extremely tough reaction from Samsung. According to multiple industry insiders cited by South Korean and Japanese business media, Samsung Electronics leadership viewed the triumph of the iPhone 17 Pro Max not simply as another successful competitor release, but as a direct threat to its long-term position in the market. Inside the company, the idea is increasingly voiced that the strategy of incremental improvements and blurred flagship lineups no longer works, while Apple, on the contrary, has once again managed to create a benchmark smartphone around which the entire industry aligns. According to sources familiar with top management discussions, Samsung set a fundamentally new objective: to create a device that does not merely compete with the iPhone, but psychologically and technologically breaks its dominance, forcing Apple to play by someone else's rules. It is in this context that an internal project increasingly surfaces, informally referred to in conversations as the Korean Pro Max. This is not about literally copying the iPhone, but about creating a smartphone that in positioning, perception, and status becomes a direct mirror response to Apple. A conceptual Samsung 18 Pro Max, albeit under a different proprietary name. Sources claim that inside the company, this project is viewed as something more than just another Galaxy S flagship. It is meant to be a phone around which Samsung will build a new philosophy of the premium segment, as close in feel as possible to Apple's ecosystem products, but with an emphasis on technological superiority. According to insiders cited by Asia Nikkei and several European tech publications, Samsung's leadership has set a strict requirement. The device will not be released unless it can outperform the iPhone on key parameters: performance, battery life, display, cameras, and user experience. Moreover, the company is reportedly considering a scenario in which the project is completely shut down if the final product turns out to be merely competitive rather than dominant. This is an atypical approach for Samsung, which has traditionally released a wide range of models, covering the market through quantity and variety. Now the bet is on a single, precisely calculated strike. Sources also claim that in developing this device, Samsung is closely studying not only Apple, but also the experience of Xiaomi, which in recent years has openly built lineups that mirror iPhones while skillfully adding its own twists. Aggressive specifications, fast charging, and an emphasis on more for the same money. According to insiders, Samsung wants to take this approach but transfer it into the ultra-premium segment, where not only specification numbers matter, but also a sense of status, design, marketing narrative, and control over the ecosystem. Special attention, according to sources, is being paid to the processor and battery life, two weak points that Apple traditionally uses as weapons against Android flagships. Samsung is reportedly betting on a new generation of its own chips, as well as a redesigned power consumption architecture, in order to confidently surpass Apple in real-world usage scenarios for the first time in a long while, not just in synthetic benchmarks. Internal leaks also point to a revised approach to cameras, not a race for megapixels, but a focus on computational photography, video, and professional modes that are meant to turn the smartphone into a tool rather than just a camera. But perhaps the most interesting aspect is the strategic subtext of the entire project. According to analysts, Samsung understands that Apple wins not so much with hardware as with perception. The iPhone is not just a device, it is a symbol, and it is precisely this symbol that Samsung wants to attack. It is important to emphasize that officially, Samsung does not confirm the existence of such a project, and all such statements remain at the level of leaks and insider information. However, indirect signs suggest that the company is indeed preparing something bigger than another update to the Galaxy lineup. Reshuffles within development teams, increased R&D budgets, closed testing programs, and changes in the rhetoric of top executives in interviews all point, according to analysts, to preparation for a major strategic move. If sources are to be believed, 2026 could become a moment of truth. It is then that Samsung may be ready to present a device that will be its most direct and aggressive challenge to Apple in the past 10 years. It will not be an iPhone killer in the classic sense, but it could be the first Samsung smartphone created with a single purpose: to take away Apple's psychological and symbolic leadership in the premium segment. And if this plan works, the smartphone market may once again enter an era of real competition, where each release is not just an update, but part of a larger war for influence, money, and the minds of users. More and more analysts agree that what is happening around Samsung's new flagship project is not a spontaneous reaction to the success of the iPhone 17 Pro Max, but part of a much longer-term plan that has been taking shape inside the company for several years. According to sources close to Asian supply chains, Samsung was preparing in advance for the moment when Apple would regain unquestioned leadership, and it was precisely at that point that the Korean corporation was supposed to deliver its counterstrike. Internal documents briefly mentioned by South Korean business publications reportedly describe a turning point flagship scenario, a device meant to change the perception of the Samsung brand among the most demanding audience. The very audience that for years chose the iPhone not because of specifications, but because of a sense of control, stability, and premium status. Insiders claim that unlike previous years, when Samsung tried to be better in all parameters at once, the current strategy focuses on a carefully calibrated balance, as close as possible to Apple's philosophy, but with one fundamental difference: demonstrative technological superiority. This is not about revolutionary shapes or radical experiments, but about subtle details such as how the body feels in the hand, interface smoothness, camera response speed, and battery life in real-world conditions rather than laboratory tests. According to Samsung's leadership, these are precisely the nuances Apple has learned to sell better than anyone else, and this is where the Korean company wants to prove it can play on the same field, but with stronger cards. Against this backdrop, it is especially telling that inside Samsung, according to rumors, even a change in marketing approach is being discussed. Instead of the usual comparisons of bigger, faster, and more powerful, a scenario of quiet confidence is being considered, where the device does not shout about its superiority, but demonstrates it through use, step by step, taking trust away from the competitor. Analysts note that if Samsung truly commits to such a move, it would mark the most serious ideological shift the company has made in recent years. This is why 2026 is increasingly being described as the point at which the fate of a new stage in the Apple-Samsung confrontation could be decided. If the Korean corporation manages to execute its plan and release a flagship that does not merely compete with the iPhone, but imposes new standards on it, the smartphone market could once again enter a state of Cold War, where every release is a shot and every presentation is a signal to the world. And then the question will no longer be about who is faster or more powerful, but about who truly controls the future of the most important technology of the 21st century, the personal smartphone. In recent months, increasingly alarming yet intriguing signals have been emerging within the global technology industry, pointing more and more clearly to the fact that Samsung is preparing the most ambitious update of its product lineup in the entire history of the brand. And according to several sources close to the leadership of the South Korean giant, the first public announcements of this new strategy are preliminarily scheduled for 2026. And this is not about cosmetic improvements or another iteration of familiar devices, but about a fundamental rethinking of what user experience can be in the post-smartphone era, as classic form factors rapidly lose relevance and the market increasingly shows signs of innovation stagnation. According to insiders cited by authoritative outlets such as Bloomberg, Nikkei Asia, and the Korean publication The Elec, Samsung has spent the last 2 years conducting an internal restructuring of its research divisions, unifying display, mobile device, and artificial intelligence teams into a single ecosystem aimed at creating a technological leap comparable in scale to the transition from button phones to touchscreens. Sources claim that the phrase window of opportunity is being used more and more frequently inside the company, and this window is directly linked to the fact that Apple, despite its dominance, is increasingly criticized for a lack of radical innovation, while other tech giants are either stuck in niche products or unwilling to risk the mass market. It is precisely at this moment that Samsung, according to insiders, decided to bet on a direction that until recently was considered too futuristic and impractical for the mass consumer: transparent technologies. Inside the company, this direction is described not merely as experimental, but as strategic, and it has long ceased to be an abstract concept. Samsung has been investing for many years in the development of transparent displays, starting with commercial solutions for storefronts, museums, and advertising panels, continuing with experiments in transparent OLED and micro-LED showcased at CES and IFA but kept out of the mass market. Samsung Display is now considered one of the global leaders in transparent screen manufacturing, and sources claim that as early as 2024, the company reached a key technological threshold at which transparency stopped being purely demonstrative and began to combine with acceptable brightness, contrast, and energy efficiency. Against this backdrop, the active integration of artificial intelligence into the device design process became the catalyst that allowed Samsung to move from "we can show a prototype" to "we can build a product." According to Korean sources, AI is used not only for image optimization and adaptive interfaces, but also for engineering tasks, component distribution, management of transparent layers, compensation for optical distortions, and even dynamic dimming of specific screen zones depending on content and lighting. Inside the company, this is referred to as smart transparency, where a device remains visually transparent but can turn into a fully dense screen when needed. It is this technology, insiders say, that will form the basis of a new lineup of devices Samsung plans to introduce starting in 2026. This includes an entire family of products: a transparent smartphone, a transparent tablet, next-generation transparent TVs, and even smart home elements integrated into glass surfaces. However, the key and most important product of this lineup, according to sources, will be the world's first commercially oriented transparent tablet, unofficially referred to inside the company as the iPad killer. According to leak reports, the tablet was chosen as the starting device for a reason. The tablet form factor allows batteries and computing modules to be placed in opaque areas of the frame or in thickened sections, while preserving the effect of an almost fully transparent working space, something that is far more difficult to achieve in a smartphone. Sources familiar with the prototypes claim that the Samsung tablet will use a hybrid architecture, a transparent OLED layer, combined with an active micro-LED backlight matrix controlled by AI in real time. This would allow the device to be nearly invisible when turned off and transform into a vivid display when activated, with support for partial transparency for augmented reality workflows, blueprints, next-generation interfaces, and professional applications. According to analysts cited by Financial Times journalists, this is where the potential revolution lies. While Apple continues to position the iPad as essentially a large iPhone, Samsung may offer a fundamentally different usage model in which the tablet ceases to be just a screen and becomes part of the surrounding space. Insiders say the device will be deeply integrated with Samsung's AI ecosystem, including a next-generation personal assistant capable of adapting the interface to context, from work and education to entertainment and design. Screen transparency, according to sources, unlocks entirely new scenarios. Architects will be able to overlay digital plans onto real objects. Designers will work with 3D models directly in physical space, and everyday users will use the tablet as a window into the digital layer of reality. This, according to insiders, may be precisely why Apple could find itself in a catching-up position. Within the industry, there is growing sentiment that Apple is too tightly bound to existing product categories and fears radically changing form factors due to the risk of cannibalizing its own devices. Samsung, by contrast, has historically been more willing to take risks by releasing experimental products, as seen with foldable smartphones, which were initially met with skepticism but ultimately set a new trend for the entire market. Insiders say that if Samsung's transparent tablet is unveiled in 2026 and proves even partially ready for mass adoption, Apple could fall several years behind, since such technologies require long development cycles and major supply chain restructuring. Moreover, sources claim Samsung is already in talks with key software developers, offering them early access to SDKs for transparent interfaces, potentially creating a snowball effect even before an official announcement. Behind the scenes at technology conferences, there is increasing talk that 2026 could become a turning point for the entire personal device industry, with transparent technologies emerging as the long-discussed next big step that no one previously dared to take first. If these insider reports are confirmed even partially, Samsung may indeed seize the initiative from Apple by offering the market not just another tablet, but a new vision of how humans interact with the digital world, where the boundary between the screen and reality begins to dissolve. And this is why, according to analysts, the next 2 years will be decisive. Either Apple manages to respond to this challenge, or for the first time in a long while finds itself in the position of having to catch up with a competitor that dared to step into the future ahead of everyone else. Against this backdrop, it is especially telling that within Apple itself, according to sources close to the Asian supply chain, transparent displays are still viewed more as a long-term experiment than as a priority product. And this, according to analysts at Morgan Stanley and Bernstein Research, could play a decisive role in shifting the balance of power in the market. While Apple remains focused on refining existing form factors and the gradual evolution of its ecosystem, Samsung, judging by insider leaks, is betting on the element of surprise and a technological shock capable of reshaping user expectations. Sources claim that within Samsung there is serious consideration of a scenario in which a transparent tablet becomes not just a standalone product, but a symbol of a new era for the brand. A kind of manifesto demonstrating that the company is once again ready to set the rules of the game. Moreover, according to Korean media reports, a limited launch in key regions, South Korea, the US, and Japan, is being discussed, with subsequent scaling if the market response proves positive. This approach allows risks to be minimized, while simultaneously creating an aura of exclusivity around the device, which could play a role no less important than the technology itself. Within the industry, there is growing talk that if Samsung manages to prove the viability of transparent devices as early as 2026, it could trigger a chain reaction, forcing competitors to urgently revise their roadmaps. And then the question will no longer be whether the market is ready for transparent technologies, but who was first to turn a futuristic idea into a real product, and who will ultimately be left behind, clinging to familiar but aging form factors. In the tech world, a new revolution is brewing, and it is not coming from the players who until recently were considered the main drivers of the industry. This time, the spotlight is on Samsung, a giant of personal electronics, the maker of the world's best OLED displays, a leader of the mobile market and one of the few capable of standing eye to eye with such giants as Apple, Huawei, and Xiaomi. But in recent months, major international analytical centers, including Bloomberg Intelligence, Nikkei Asia, and the Korean business outlets Mail Business and ET News, have begun publishing leaks that became a true sensation for the global industry. Samsung is preparing to enter the automotive market, and not as a component supplier or yet another smart home platform, but as a full-fledged manufacturer of its own electric vehicle. According to insiders, and Business Korea and Korea Economic Daily are already cautiously reporting this, the corporation's internal engineering divisions have approved the development project for the first car in Samsung's history. The project received the working name S-Auto 1, and its release is scheduled for 2026. Sources inside the company say the car will become part of a major strategic program aimed at expanding Samsung's presence in the segment of next-generation personal transportation. According to sources close to the Samsung Digital Mobility Lab Research Center, the decision to launch its own electric car was not made suddenly, but became the result of several months of closed meetings discussing the global market situation and the phenomenal success of a direct competitor, Xiaomi. And here is where things get interesting. Xiaomi, until recently known as a producer of smartphones, ecosystem gadgets, and home electronics, has over the past 2 years achieved what industry experts call the Chinese automotive miracle. Their SU7 and SU7 Ultra models have become some of the most discussed electric vehicles in China and beyond. SU7 is a so-called mass-market model with long range, a premium HyperOS auto multimedia system, and one of the best autopilots in its class. The SU7 Ultra went even further. Active aerodynamics, power exceeding many sports EVs, acceleration comparable to the Tesla Model S Plaid, and at the same time a price significantly lower than that of competitors. It is precisely this combination, power, functionality, and aggressive pricing, that allowed Xiaomi to break into the automotive market so rapidly that even Tesla and BYD were forced to reconsider their pricing policies and marketing strategies. According to Chinese regulators, Xiaomi began earning billions of dollars from its automotive division in the very first year of sales, and the number of pre-orders exceeded analysts' forecasts by almost 3 times. This fact, according to sources in Seoul Economic Daily, became one of the key factors that pushed Samsung's board of directors to a decision. If Xiaomi could do it, Samsung must do it better. But Samsung's motives are not limited to competing with Xiaomi. Against the backdrop of SU7's success, rumors have been growing that Apple plans to resume development of its long-discussed but frozen Apple Car project. The Information, Wall Street Journal, and several Taiwanese suppliers claim that a renewed team of engineers responsible for autonomous systems and the architecture of the future car has been formed in Cupertino. And although Apple officially remains silent, experts are certain The emergence of Xiaomi in the market and the excitement around SU7 forced Apple to return to a project that could become the company's biggest technological breakthrough since the first iPhone. And that is where Samsung understands. If Apple enters the market earlier, the situation will repeat the scenario of the mobile revolution, when Apple was the first to demonstrate a product that set standards for the next decade. Samsung wants to avoid repeating that story at any cost. South Korean insiders from the KOR Tech Leaks community claim that inside the company, there is an unspoken directive to become the first technology corporation to introduce a full next-generation electric vehicle, earlier than Apple and earlier than any competitor outside China. At the same time, according to Nikkei analysts, Samsung has one key advantage that not even Apple possesses: massive vertical integration. The company produces everything: chips, cameras, sensors, batteries, displays, communication systems, navigation, Exynos Auto AI processors, and autonomous driving components. Samsung SDI is already one of the largest electric car battery manufacturers in the world, cooperating with BMW, Hyundai, Stellantis, and several European automakers. Samsung Electromechanics supplies radar and LiDAR systems, and Samsung Display creates OLED panels used in many modern premium cars. All this means only one thing: the company has the resources to build a car almost entirely from its own components, giving it advantages in cost, logistics, quality control, and development speed. And although it is still unknown what the design of Samsung's future car will be, what characteristics it will have, what its range, acceleration, battery capacity, and level of autonomy will be, all sources agree on one thing: development is active, and the company views this project as the culmination of the next technological era. According to Bloomberg analysts, Samsung plans to bet on deep integration between the smartphone, the car, and the smart home ecosystem, expanding the SmartThings concept to the level of personal transport. According to sources familiar with prototype interfaces, the Samsung car will be able to transform into a mobile control center for the user's entire ecosystem, from TVs and home appliances to work devices and VR platforms. This will not just be an electric vehicle, but part of a large digital environment in which Samsung wants to become the absolute leader. But the main question remains: will the company manage to enter the market before Apple? And if it does, will the Samsung car be the very product that changes the industry as powerfully as the first Galaxy once did, which became an alternative to the iPhone? Experts believe we are on the verge of a new race, a race where the rules are set not by automakers but by tech corporations. The transport market is undergoing a transformation comparable to the emergence of the internet or smartphones, and now those who have always shaped the future of technology are entering it: Samsung, Xiaomi, Apple, and Huawei. If the rumors are confirmed, then in 2026 we may see a presentation that will permanently redefine what a car should be. The industry is preparing for a new era, and the world is holding its breath. Korean media write that in the coming months, a series of closed demonstrations of the first concepts is expected, which will be shown only to a narrow circle of partners, representatives of the automotive industry, supplier executives, and some South Korean government structures. According to one source who wished to remain anonymous, a prototype already exists in the form of a functional platform on which interfaces, battery cooling systems, autonomous driving architecture, and interactions between various Samsung chipsets are being tested. It is said that inside the company, this prototype is called the heart of the future. That is how important it is for the corporation's entire strategy. Engineers insist that Samsung aims to create not just another electric car for the sake of competition, but a new standard in technological transportation, just as the company once set standards for displays, cameras, and mobile chips. In recent years, the world of personal technology has been undergoing a process that is increasingly compared to the beginning of the end of the era of smartphones in their familiar form. And although for the mass user this still sounds like science fiction, inside the largest technology corporations intensive work has long been underway on what is supposed to replace the phone as the central device of human digital life. The smartphone has become so universal that giving it up seems impossible. It is simultaneously a means of communication, a work tool, a wallet, a navigator, a camera, a pass to the digital world, and an extension of a person's identity. That is why any attempt to create an alternative has failed. The market did not accept devices that offered fewer capabilities than a phone. And the key point here is that the new alternative cannot simply be another gadget. It must change the very idea of how a person interacts with technology. According to sources close to Samsung's research divisions, the South Korean giant believes that the industry has now reached this threshold. And in recent years, the company has been actively working on the concept of the world's first smart ring that is capable not only of complementing the smartphone, but in the future of becoming a direct competitor to it, up to partially or completely replacing it. Indirect evidence that Samsung is moving in this direction can be found in dozens of patents filed by the company in recent years in the USA, South Korea, and Europe. These documents describe devices that at first glance seem too bold: rings with built-in sensors, microprojectors, gesture recognition systems, haptic feedback, and constant connection to cloud computing. According to engineers involved in these developments, this is not just a wearable accessory, but a full-fledged computing node that becomes the center of the user's personal ecosystem. Respected publications including Bloomberg, Nikkei Asia, and the Korea Herald have repeatedly noted that Samsung has sharply increased investment in post-smartphone devices, meaning devices that are meant to come after the era of classic screen-based gadgets. And the smart ring with projection, in the opinion of analysts, fits perfectly into this strategy. The key idea is that the screen as a physical object is gradually ceasing to be essential. Inside Samsung, they believe that the future lies in interfaces that appear only when needed and disappear when the need for them goes away. Projection technologies that the company has been working on for many years make it possible to display an image on any surface, from the user's palm to a table, wall, or even the air, using a directed light field. Combined with a ring that is constantly on the hand and tracks movements, gestures, and finger positioning, this creates a completely new way of interacting with digital content. In fact, a person receives a screen without a screen that is activated by a gesture, a glance, or a voice command. According to insiders, Samsung considers this moment a turning point because it makes it possible to get rid of the main dependency of modern humans on the smartphone: the need to constantly hold a rectangular piece of glass in their hands. It is important to understand that Samsung is not starting this path from scratch. The company already has one of the most advanced ecosystems in the world: Galaxy smartphones, smartwatches, earbuds, tablets, AR and XR developments, as well as vast experience in creating displays, semiconductors, and sensors. In recent years, Samsung has actively experimented with flexible screens, transparent displays, miniature projectors, and gesture control technologies. Many of these solutions never reached the mass market, but according to former company employees, they became the foundation for the new project. In this concept, the smart ring acts not as a standalone device, but as a key to an ecosystem in which computing is distributed between the cloud, home devices, and wearable gadgets. According to sources in the Korean industry, within Samsung, this project is seen as a strategic response to Apple's dominance in the premium smartphone segment and the growing pressure from Chinese flagships by Xiaomi, Huawei, and Oppo. The smartphone market has reached a stage where innovation has become evolutionary rather than revolutionary. Cameras are getting better, processors more powerful, screens brighter, but the format of the device itself remains unchanged, which is why the largest players are looking for ways beyond the familiar paradigm. Apple is betting on spatial computing and headsets. Chinese companies are experimenting with transparent and modular devices. And Samsung, according to analysts, has chosen the path of maximum miniaturization and the dissolving of technology into everyday human life. Insiders claim that Samsung's smart ring prototypes already exist and are being actively tested inside the company. However, they are far from the final product, with the main challenges related to battery life, heat dissipation, and projection quality. Placing a sufficiently powerful module inside a ring body that can reliably project an image is an engineering challenge that no one has previously faced at this level. which is why, according to sources, Samsung is betting on a hybrid architecture where part of the computing is performed on the device itself and part in the cloud with minimal latency, allowing the hardware requirements inside the ring to be significantly reduced while preserving functionality comparable to a smartphone. Special attention is being paid to the interface. Unlike a phone where the user interacts directly with a screen, the smart ring implies a completely different approach in which finger gestures, micro-movements of the hand, voice control, and even gaze direction tracking are combined into a single system. And according to engineers, the ultimate goal is to make interaction with the digital world intuitive and almost invisible, like a hand movement or a turn of the head, with projection technology playing a key role because it allows information to be visualized wherever it is convenient for the user without being tied to a single device. For now, Samsung is not officially naming a release timeframe or revealing technical specifications. However, sources claim that the first public demonstrations of the concept may take place in the coming years, and this will not be a mass product, but rather a demonstration of direction, similar to how the first flexible displays were once shown. Analysts agree that if Samsung manages to bring this technology to a working state, the consequences for the market will be enormous. Smartphones will not disappear instantly, but a gradual shift will begin toward devices that do not require constant attention or physical presence in the user's hands. That is why many experts say the world is on the verge of a new technological revolution, comparable in scale to the transition from button phones to smartphones. And the company that first offers a real, convenient, and mass-market alternative to the phone will gain not just a market advantage, but control over the next generation of personal technology. And judging by the information emerging from inside Samsung, the South Korean giant intends to be the one to take this step first. And if a projection smart ring truly manages to combine the functions of a phone, an interface, and a personal assistant, the familiar smartphone may turn into a transitional technology, and the very way humans interact with the digital world may change forever. And this is precisely why many analysts believe that the race to find an alternative to smartphones has already begun. It is simply still hidden from the eyes of the mass consumer, and its outcome may determine who becomes the absolute leader of the next technological era. The other day, Samsung took a step that at first glance may look like a routine update of its mobile chip lineup, but upon closer analysis appears to mark the beginning of a strategic pivot for the entire company. Exynos 2600 is not just the most advanced mobile processor in Samsung's history. It is the first signal that the South Korean giant is beginning to view its own chips not as smartphone components, but as a new type of universal computing platform capable of extending far beyond pocket devices. The arrival of Exynos 2600 comes at a moment when the industry is facing two crises at once. A crisis of mobile innovation, where smartphones grow more powerful while the user experience barely changes, and a crisis of AI centralization, where nearly all artificial intelligence is concentrated in data centers controlled by a few players, above all, NVIDIA. Judging by the architecture of Exynos 2600, Samsung is attempting to strike at both fronts simultaneously. The key feature of Exynos 2600 lies not only in its 2 nanometers GAA process, but in how that process is used. Instead of allocating transistors solely to CPU or GPU growth, Samsung redistributes the compute budget toward AI blocks, memory, and bandwidth. This is a chip designed not for benchmarks, but for continuous work with neural networks locally, autonomously, and in real time. In essence, Exynos 2600 is an attempt to create a mass-market edge AI processor, something no one has previously done at this scale. This is where the first hidden conflict with NVIDIA emerges. Formally, Exynos 2600 does not compete with server GPUs, but strategically it undermines the very model on which NVIDIA's empire is built, a model where all intelligence lives in the cloud and devices remain mere terminals. If on-device AI becomes a mass standard, billions of devices will begin performing tasks that today require access to data centers, which does not destroy NVIDIA's market, but erodes its monopolistic role as the primary source of AI computation. For Samsung, this opens far broader prospects than the smartphone market alone. Exynos 2600 looks like the first step toward a unified line of chips that could later scale upward into tablets, laptops, AR devices, service robots, smart displays, and autonomous systems. Samsung is one of the few companies in the world that simultaneously controls chip manufacturing, displays, memory, sensors, and end devices. And Exynos 2600 for the first time looks like a node capable of tying all of this into a single computing ecosystem. Against this backdrop, Apple's position becomes especially interesting. Apple traditionally dominates mobile SoCs through vertical integration, but its strategy remains focused on a single class of devices, while Samsung, through Exynos 2600, is beginning to play a longer game. If Apple perfects the iPhone as a product, Samsung is trying to rethink the role of the device itself, turning it into a local AI center that does not depend on the cloud and can evolve alongside the user. The Chinese vector is no less important. Companies like Huawei and Xiaomi are actively developing their own chips, but are constrained either by manufacturing sanctions or by dependence on third-party fabs. And in this context, Exynos 2600 becomes Samsung's way of locking in a technological advantage that is difficult to catch up with without access to advanced process nodes and decades of semiconductor expertise. However, this path carries enormous risks, as a 2-nanometer process is not just manufacturing complexity, but a potential source of instability, heat, and scaling issues. And moreover, if Samsung truly views Exynos as a platform beyond smartphones, it will have to compete not only with Apple and Qualcomm, but also with NVIDIA's ecosystem, which is already deeply embedded in AI development, software, and infrastructure, requiring not only strong hardware, but long-term investments in SDKs, tools, and partner ecosystems. And yet it is precisely the scale of this bet that makes Exynos 2600 truly important. This is not a one-season chip and not an attempt to catch up with competitors on raw numbers. It is a shift from mobile thinking to computational thinking, where the smartphone is only one form of realization. If Samsung's strategy succeeds, Exynos 2600 may be remembered as the moment when the company began transforming from a device manufacturer into an architect of distributed artificial intelligence. In such a scenario, the question will no longer be whose smartphone is faster, but who controls intelligence at the device level rather than at the server level. And it is here that Samsung, for the first time in a long while, steps onto a field where its rivals are not only Apple and Chinese brands, but NVIDIA itself. Not yet directly, but along the most fundamental direction of the industry's development. If Exynos 2600 is viewed not as a product but as a signal, it becomes clear that Samsung no longer sees mobile chips as a closed niche. On the contrary, within the company, a clearer understanding is forming that the smartphone is merely the first and most massive entry point into a much broader computing ecosystem. In this sense, Exynos 2600 looks like a proving ground through which Samsung is testing an architecture capable of scaling far beyond the familiar mobile market. The key idea underlying this chip is the deconcentration of intelligence. Over the past decade, the industry has moved towards centralization, with more and more computation, data, and models flowing into data centers, while user devices became thin clients dependent on the cloud. Exynos 2600, by contrast, lays the foundation for an alternative model in which intelligence is distributed to the edges of the network, and a smartphone, tablet, or wearable device ceases to be an endpoint and begins to function as an autonomous computing node. This is where a long-term conflict of interests with the server accelerator market starts to take shape. Even if Exynos 2600 never directly appears in data centers, its philosophy undermines the very logic of hyper-centralized AI, because the more powerful local chips become, the fewer tasks require calls to remote compute farms, changing the economics of AI, reducing infrastructure load, and gradually shifting the balance of influence from cloud giants to end device manufacturers. For Samsung, this opens a scenario in which the company can become not just a hardware supplier, but an operator of distributed AI infrastructure embedded in billions of devices. an approach fundamentally different from the classic model of licensing or selling compute power, making AI part of everyday user experience, invisible, constant, and tightly linked to personal context. Special attention should be paid to how Exynos 2600 could influence the evolution of software platforms. If local AI becomes the standard, developers are forced to rethink application architectures, creating demand for new SDKs optimized for on-device models, hybrid computing, and dynamic task distribution across devices, giving Samsung a rare opportunity to impose its own tools and standards on the market and secure influence not only at the hardware level, but also at the software level. In this context, the comparison of strategies is especially revealing. Apple traditionally builds a closed ecosystem focused on control and predictability. Chinese brands bet on speed, aggressive pricing, and rapid market share capture, while Samsung, through this chip, begins to play a third game, an infrastructure-level game where decisive importance lies not in sales of a specific model, but in the depth of penetration of a computing architecture across all classes of devices. Exynos 2600 is not a final point, but the beginning of a long chain of decisions that could lead to the formation of a new role for the company in the global technological system, a role in which Samsung ceases to be merely a device manufacturer and becomes an architect of a distributed computing world. In the tech industry, events that literally push the boundaries of the familiar market and set a new trajectory for the entire sector are rare, but this is exactly what is now happening around the Samsung Galaxy Z Trifold, a device already being called not just another smartphone, but the first mass representative of a new category of personal electronics. For many years, the idea of a triple folding phone seemed too complex, too fragile, too expensive to ever reach the market, and many experts placed it in the category of experimental concepts that companies show at exhibitions but never release in mass production. However, Samsung quietly and consistently moved toward this goal, and at the end of 2025 completed a years-long journey by unveiling the world's first commercial smartphone with a triple folding display, the Galaxy Z Trifold. Reputable outlets such as The Verge, TechRadar, Android Authority, and GSM Arena almost simultaneously published reviews of the device, calling it Samsung's most important technological experiment in recent years, and emphasizing that Trifold is not just an evolution of the Fold lineup, but a leap into a category that previously did not exist. It should be noted that Samsung had indeed been preparing for the moment when it could show such a device to the market. Between 2021 and 2023, the company regularly demonstrated three-fold flex in and out prototypes at exhibitions like Display Week, and many observers viewed them as technical showcases that might become the basis for future solutions, but would likely never reach consumer-grade refinement. Now that Trifold has become a reality, it is clear that Samsung gradually, step by step, built the foundation that allowed the company to leap several years ahead of the entire foldable device market. The core of Trifold is Samsung's next-generation Flex OLED display, capable of bending at 2 points simultaneously. When fully unfolded, the device becomes a large 10-inch flexible tablet with a 120Hz refresh rate, brightness at the level of Samsung's flagship models, and adaptive power-saving technology. When folded, Trifold functions as a regular smartphone with a 6.5-inch screen. The dual-hinge mechanism is the result of years of refinement, and although Samsung does not publicly disclose details of its construction, publications confirm the use of a new titanium frame, reduced thickness of the folding display layers, and a system designed so that the load from the two hinges is evenly distributed. It is important to emphasize that Samsung officially states that the Galaxy Z Trifold does not support the S Pen, because the current UTG glass version is not designed to withstand stylus pressure, which fundamentally distinguishes the device from the Fold series oriented toward productivity. Another key feature is the hardware platform. Trifold is built on the Snapdragon 8 Elite, equipped with 16 GB of RAM and up to 1 TB of storage, allowing the device to handle ultrabook-level tasks. In tablet mode, the smartphone supports advanced multitasking features, including 3 simultaneous windows, drag and drop between apps, and improved Samsung DeX integration. This makes Trifold a device that can simultaneously serve as a phone, tablet, and work tool. And this is the primary argument analysts cite when calling Trifold the first device of a new category. But to assess the impact of Trifold on the industry, the market reaction must be considered. First, competitors reacted instantly. Huawei has been promoting its own multi-format foldable devices for several years, and in 2024 to 2025 introduced the Mate X5 and Mate XT, one of which became the world's first commercial trifold phone, but its distribution is limited to China due to sanctions and the absence of Google services. Huawei proved the design possible, but it is Samsung that created the first global product. This sharply intensified the competition. Insiders from Digital Chat Station and Chinese analysts cited in Caixin confirmed that Huawei is preparing the second generation of its Trifold device to enter the international market through third countries. However, on a global scale, it is Samsung that becomes the trendsetter of the form factor, and this moment is described in the industry as strategically important. Xiaomi, Oppo, and Vivo also have triple-fold display prototypes and have shown concepts at closed exhibitions, but none of them is ready for mass production, as reported by Nikkei Asia and ET News. Thus, Samsung is now in a unique position. The first mover filter creates a branding effect similar to what the Note lineup or the first Galaxy Fold once achieved. Against the backdrop of the Trifold's debut, analysts from DSCC and Canalys began talking about the formation of a new market segment, devices that replace several categories at once: smartphones, tablets, and partially laptops. Statistical data shows that foldable device users spend significantly more time in multi-window mode than owners of standard smartphones. Trifold radicalizes this scenario. The device offers a large display designed for professional tasks and essentially breaks the traditional boundary between a smartphone and a tablet. But the most interesting aspect is the influence of Trifold on Apple. Until recently, Apple maintained the position that foldable phones remain insufficiently mature to become part of its lineup. According to TechRadar, Tom's Guide, The Information, and several Bloomberg reports, Apple indeed conducted extensive research on flexible panels, worked with LG Display and Samsung Display, tested two types of foldable prototypes, but postponed mass implementation due to issues with reliability and display thickness. In 2024 to 2025, the situation changed. ET News and Reuters reported that Apple is preparing its first foldable iPhone with an estimated release date in 2026. Exact specifications remain unknown, but leaks mention a form factor similar to either flip or fold, depending on which concept the company ultimately chooses. And here, the Trifold creates pressure. Apple is used to entering the market later than others, but with a product that defines the standard of the category. However, in the case of foldables, the scenario is shifting. The technological distance Samsung and Huawei have covered over 5 to 6 years of flexible display development has become too large for Apple to simply catch up. Therefore, analysts from Morgan Stanley and Bloomberg write that Apple may either skip the phase of conventional foldable phones or combine the launch of its foldable iPhone with new ecosystem features, including integration with Vision OS. Such rumors are indeed circulating among insiders, but no confirmations exist yet. Even so, with the arrival of the Trifold, it becomes clear that even Apple can no longer ignore the growing segment of flexible devices. The company openly states that Trifold is a new class of device that will naturally evolve gradually, and the market understands this, just as it once understood that the first fold models were only the beginning. Thus, the Galaxy Z Trifold becomes one of the most significant events in the mobile industry of the past 10 years. It opens a new category, sets a new trajectory for competition, forces Apple to accelerate development, makes tablet and laptop manufacturers reconsider their strategies, and even influences the components market. It is a device that changes the perception of what a smartphone can be and creates the foundation for a new technological cycle. And if previous years were dedicated to cameras, chips, and batteries, the coming years will be dedicated to form factors, devices capable of changing their shape depending on the user's task. And Samsung Galaxy Z Trifold is the first and brightest representative of this new era.